Scientism and Evolution.
Scientism has its roots in the Big Bang cosmology and evolutionary thought. If humans have evolved by a material, purposeless process, then there is no basis for believing in a God who created us and revealed moral truths or imposing those moral views in any area of life. Using false science as a weapon, Satan has been able to shoot down the credibility and authority of the Bible. The standard assumption is that science is objective knowledge, while religion is an expression of subjective need. Religion, therefore, must subordinate its claims about the world to whatever science decrees. Scientism assumes that science is the controlling reality about life, so anything that can be validated scientifically ought to be done. Other things are subjective fantasy, like love, beauty, good, evil, conscious, and ethics. Science, which originally simply meant the study of the natural world, has in this view become conflicted with scientific naturalism, materialism, and a philosophy that the natural world is all that exists. Humans are reduced to objects that can be inspected, experimented on, and ultimately controlled. In 1922, G.K. Chesterton warned that scientism had become a creed taking over our institutions, a system of thought which began with evolution and has ended in eugenics. But I believe that it began much earlier with the heliocentric universe, our solar system, Big Bang cosmology, giving us the perfect storyline to introduce biological evolution at a later date. As we start our journey looking into scientism deeper, which millions and millions of people in the world recognize as unquestionable scientific fact, we need to start with the evolutionary theory and its fabricated millions and billions of years of primordial history. Stop and consider if the entire scientific and academic world has monolithically embraced or endorsed something as unquestionable scientific fact, when in reality, it's been a massive deception on a grand scale.
And so when it comes to things like the Big Bang, millions of years, billions of years, dinosaurs, evolution, all this stuff, there's so many lies and so many deceptions associated with all of those topics. And so that makes you think, well, if Satan is a liar and he's the father of liars, right? Our adversary goes around deceiving people. That's where the real battle is. It's in our minds. It's not like he shows up at our window with a pitchfork saying, I've got a deal for you to sign in blood. You know, I'm going to blackmail you. No, it's about the mind. It's about what we think. And so if he gets us to think wrong, if he gets us to believe things like evolution and Big Bang and millions and billions of years and just all sorts of things that don't line up with any kind of science at all. None of that stuff has any kind of evidence or scientific stuff. The real evidence is completely against it. And of course, when you look at the Word of God, that's also completely against it. Why? Because the Word of God is true.
They need gaps, they need canopies, they need whatever it takes to somehow align with the fact of millions of years and billions of miles, or billions of years and millions of miles. Evolution needs those millions and billions of everything. And Christians, instead of reading Genesis and saying, hey, Genesis 1 says in 6 days, right? In 6 days God created. But no, they realize in the back of their mind, well, science is showing us this. I don't want to appear too ignorant, so let's invent a gap theory. Let's invent a canopy theory, because certainly we know there's no waters above the heavens. And this has to stop. We need to tremble at God's word, stop pulling the power out of it by reducing it to literature or poetry and ripping it apart. This is a huge problem.
Many people that have walked away from the Bible or the claims of Christianity or even 6-day literal creationism usually have fallen away because of all the finds and the validity they find in science. And again, remember, there's science and there's scientism. What have you fallen for? What have you believed in? Has it been real science or has it been scientism?
We no longer feel ourselves to be guests in someone else's home and therefore obliged to make our behavior conform with a set of pre-existing cosmic rules. It's our creation now. We make the rules. We establish the parameters of reality. We create the world, And because we do, we no longer have to justify our behavior, for we are now the architects of the universe. We are responsible to nothing outside of ourselves, for we are the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever.
Wow, well, that's blasphemous.
Once in a while, I get people that that claim they don't believe in evolution. And my response generally is, why not? Really, why not?
You guys believe 20 billion years ago there was a Big Bang where nothing exploded and produced everything. 4.6 billion years ago the Earth cooled down, made a hard rocky crust. It rained on the rocks for millions of years, turned them into soup, and the soup came alive 3 billion years ago. Found somebody to marry, and something to eat, of course, and slowly evolved into everything we see today. There are some lies in our science books. Taught it for 15 years. Even though I'm not teaching it anymore, I still like to study. It's so many neat things to learn. We're going to cover some of that tonight. I'm not against science, I'm not against schools, I'm not against teachers, because most of them don't know what they believe. You have to tell them. They teach the kids it all started with a Big Bang 20 billion years ago. What exploded?
In a millionth of 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 a second, it went from a size smaller than an atom to bigger than a galaxy. Whoosh.
This is what the textbooks teach.
Before the Big Bang, there was nothing, literally nothing, an infinitesimal nugget of space. And then something happened, triggering the most colossal explosion in history.
Shame on you. What a shame.
Yes, boys and girls, you see, nothing exploded, and here we are. So I asked this professor if I could ask him some questions about the Big Bang. I said, where did all this matter come from? He said, well, we don't know that for sure. I said, well, sir, would you please tell me where the laws came from? The universe is run by laws, gravity, centrifugal force, inertia. Who gave the laws? He said, we don't know that either. I said, sir, could you tell me where the energy came from? You know, it takes energy to make a Big Bang. Who bought the gas to run this machine anyway? He said, we don't know that either. I said, sir, could I ask you another question? He said, sure. What else would you like to know? What else? What do you mean else? You haven't told me nothing yet. One professor was getting kind of upset about this time. He said, Mr. Hovind, there are hundreds of varieties of dogs in the world. He said, do you mean to tell me that you believe all these dogs came from 2 dogs off of Noah's Ark? You expect me to believe that? I said, sir, would you look at what you're teaching your students? You're teaching your students that all the dogs in the world came from a rock.
Charles Darwin was disciplined. I mean, he did these extraordinary experiments, this series of experiments.
Then they're going to tell the kids, well, we have evidence for this theory. Charlie Darwin stopped off at these islands right there called the Galapagos Islands. Charlie studied the birds very carefully and said, you know what? I think all these birds had a common ancestor. I bet you're right, Charlie. It was a bird. You see 14 kinds of birds, and you conclude that birds and bananas are related.
Here are these ancient dinosaur bones or fossils.
They tell the kids they have evidence of evolution from fossils. I don't think so. If you find a fossil in the dirt, all you know is it died. You don't know that it had any kids. And you sure don't know that it had different kids. You bring in a bone to the judge. Judge, I found this bone in the dirt. This is the ancestor of all the humans today. They would laugh at you. You don't know that that's the ancestor of anybody. And why on earth would you think a bone in the dirt can do something animals today cannot do? They'll say, boys and girls, you have 2 bones in your wrist, radius and ulna. And boys and girls, look at the whale's flipper carefully. Did you know the whale has 2 bones in his flipper? And they're called the radius and the ulna? Same as ours. Wow. Who named them, teacher? The whale? Think about it.
I'm here to tell my people it's time to stop believing bull just because tell you bull with a straight look on their face. Evolution say people came from monkeys. And the question is, why is there still monkeys? Is these the retarded monkeys? They didn't turn into people just yet.
Even Stephen Gould admitted the absence of fossil evidence for intermediary stages is a persistent and nagging problem for evolution. See what's happened, these guys have looked for missing links in the fossil record. They can't find any, and so they say, well, maybe evolution happened so fast it wasn't preserved. Maybe a reptile laid an egg and a bird hatched out. Well, who did that bird marry?
It's just really a hard thing. It's really a hard thing. Your world just becomes fantastically complicated when you don't believe in evolution.
What we're finding is that natural selection seems to be an incredibly important factor in generating new species.
Natural selection, the key evolutionary mechanism Darwin identified.
The bad designs get eaten by the good ones, and so all you have is good ones.
Why is there still monkeys?
Natural selection doesn't cause any evolution. It makes sure the bad ones don't survive, but it's not going to change it to something else.
That's what evolution is.
If you worked in a factory that produced cars and your job was to check for defects, and you caught every single mistake and you rejected it, how long would it take that process to change the car to an airplane? You say it'll never change it. That's my point. The students are taught we have evidence from development. Darwin considered this by far the strongest single class of evidence. This textbook says the human embryo growing in the mother has gills like a fish. Those little folds of skin are not gills. Those little wrinkles under your chin when you're growing up later develop into bones in the ear and glands in the throat. They never have anything to do with breathing. I've seen folks that have 5 or 6 chins and they can't breathe through any of them but the top one. Those are not gill slits. Ernst Haeckel, though, said the turning point in his thinking was when he read Darwin's book. He made huge charts of his posters of his drawings of these embryos and traveled all over Germany and just about by himself converted the Germans to believing in evolution. Haeckel took a drawing of a dog and a human embryo and he changed them to make them look exactly alike. On top are Haeckel's fake drawings. Underneath are actual photographs of what he claimed he was drawing a picture of. Now, either he's a lousy artist or he's a liar. Well, it turns out he's a liar. He was convicted of fraud by his own university, proven to be a fraud. But guess what? Haeckel's fake drawings are still used in textbooks in your state right now. It's only been proven wrong 125 years ago. I know it takes a while to get textbooks up to date, but that ought to be plenty of time. Adolf Hitler said, "You let me control the textbooks, I'll control the state." Watch this sentence here carefully. Some kid's doing this for homework tonight. Boys and girls, do you think humans are still evolving? Now, what kind of question is that? Doesn't that question assume that evolution has happened? What if a kid doesn't believe in evolution? How's he supposed to do his homework tonight? That question does not teach him how to think critically. That teaches him what to think, not how to think. And when the kid gets done with this course, he's going to think he knows how to think. But he doesn't. He knows how to be told what to think. Brainwashing at taxpayer expense. They want to use my tax dollars to teach that to your kids in our schools.
If you want to deny evolution, that's fine. But don't make your kids do it, because we need them.
And that's where the problem comes in. Okay? If you want to believe in the Big Bang, just enjoy yourself, but keep your religion at home. The Russian atheist astronomer came to America and spoke at one of the universities, and he started off his speech, he said, "Folks, either there is a God or there isn't. Both possibilities are frightening. If there is no God, we're in trouble. But if God made the world, He owns it. That means He makes the rules. You see, if there is a God, we better find out who He is and find out what He wants and do what He says." Malcolm Muggeridge said, "I am convinced the theory of evolution, especially the extent to which it's been applied, will be one of the great jokes in the history books of the future."
We too old, we too smart to believe. Don't make no sense. You too old to be believing in evolution.
It's a joke. And it would be a joke if it weren't for the tragic results. How many kids are taught this thing every day and believe it, and it destroys their faith?
46% of Americans believe in the creationist view. God created humans in the present form at one time in the last 10,000 years. Does that just shock you that so many people still think that?
Yes, it does.
Shock you?
It doesn't shock me, but it's pretty troubling.
How about the recent push to implement intelligent design in school curriculums?
It's very bad. It's very dangerous.
You don't mess with the truth. You just don't mess with.
Well, do we know the truth?
Well, we certainly know that the universe was created a long time ago.
Intelligent design is, as the saying goes, dumb.
You have science. You have true science, which is actual knowledge, things that are repeatable, testable, observable, different facts and things that you can really dig into as reality. But then you've got this thing in modern day society called, what's referred to now as scientism. It's a lot of theology dressed up as science. And it needs to be exposed. Because as Christians, we want to focus on the truth. We want to focus on God, face Him, and just ignore all the distractions. But while we're facing God and we're observing that, we also need to be aware of what the distractions are so that we can help others understand. And so we want to expose the lies for what they are.
As the saying goes, the greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing the world that he didn't exist. And to do that, he has to first convince the world that God doesn't exist. And through science, I think he's achieved it. Through scientism, science itself is a beautiful thing, but scientism, when it turns into a theology, when it turns into a religion, that is when it's a very bad thing.
The Bible has never been wrong. And as far as I can tell, unfortunately, in most cases, science has never been right. They've got theories, and they've got an agenda. That's the problem. The agenda is to take God out of everything.
It seems that whenever the Bible and science seem to clash, the Bible takes the backseat. The Bible is misinterpreted. The Bible is changed. The Bible is the one who has to bow to science. And this should not be the case. Science should align with the Bible. Science should not malign the Bible.
We understand that we are in a war through the education system, through media, even through Hollywood. This lie is being perpetuated, and again, many souls are at stake.
Our culture's materialistic worldview is rooted in scientism. According to scientism, if something is not rational or not verifiable through the physical senses, then it is not real. We see then that scientism blinds us to everything in reality that is beyond the scope of the scientific method, no matter what the method may reveal to us. So how much of reality is left out? Almost all of it. Yet that is what evolutionism has very nearly persuaded the world is the truth about origins. Mark it down. There are only two explanations for the existence of all that exists: God or evolution. Biblical truth is the wrecking ball that smashes Satan's edifice of deceptions built on false science, his scientism agenda. Make no mistake, the very foundation of all mankind's knowledge depends on what is believed to be the truth about the origins of all that exists. No one can go further back than the beginning in a search for the true origin of all that exists. Therefore, whatever one believes is the truth about the origin of everything automatically becomes the foundation upon which all other knowledge is processed.
When you study when it comes to Big Bang cosmology, when it comes to the whole creation of the universe, understand that without the Big Bang, there is no evolution. Without the Big Bang heliocentric, universe, when it came to gravity, that everything, has to orbit around the sun, and gravity is what makes, everything exist. Understand that without that entire narrative, there is no evolution.
It started out as a big theory. Now it's pretty much accepted as fact. And if you talk about anything else, it's a heresy. And they know the biggest problem with that is how can you have something come from nothing? So now you have these scientists that start talking really nutty. Like the biggest problem with cosmology today is nothing. You've heard that probably.
Essentially, you can get a universe from nothing without any supernatural shenanigans. That basically, by quantum mechanics and the laws of physics we understand in principle, an entire universe with 100 billion galaxies, each containing 100 billion stars, can come from nothing because its total energy could be zero. And therefore, you don't need to literally violate any laws of physics to create a universe. And no, we don't know that for certain, but even that possibility is amazing. And I find it worth celebrating the fact that we can probe such things, and we shouldn't be afraid of a universe that maybe has no purpose, because we create our own purpose, and our own purpose adds more meaning to our lives. It means our brief moment in the sun matters because that's the only moment we have.
Which it means that everything came from nothing and then exploded. So when you really drill this stuff down to the basics, it doesn't make much sense. But since you're hearing this 24/7, and all the school systems teach it, nobody even thinks to question it. And if you're into the Bible and things like that, what surprises me is most people won't even look to see if these things hold up to biblical scrutiny. Yeah, people will say, well, we know God created the universe, but they couldn't tell you, other than maybe Genesis chapter 1, where to go and look for certain things. That's a problem.
And so you have this same thing in the mainstream science world, scientism. you have people that are studying cosmology and astronomy and physics and chemistry and biology and all this stuff, but a lot of times they're not even studying the real thing. Instead, they're just studying what somebody else has said about it. And then those people, they know stuff based on what somebody else had said. And so it keeps building on, the deception keeps going until finally every once in a while somebody in the middle of that wakes up and starts to look at the evidence and says, hey, wait a minute, this is not lining up with what we're teaching and what we're believing. Something's wrong. And of course then that guy is immediately ousted, not just for challenging the authority, because that can be a good thing. Sometimes they like that. But if you're challenging the authority and bringing in real truth, that they don't like, because real truth brings in God.
The agenda is to keep people from the realization that there's a God. And I think back again to Romans 1, the creation evidencing a creator, the idea is to just counterfeit the creation through science, therefore using through the telescope a dimly lit lens to not be able to see God. And that's what's happening.
Or imposing those moral views in any area of life. Using false science as a weapon, Satan has been able to shoot down the credibility and authority of the Bible. The standard assumption is that science is objective knowledge, while religion is an expression of subjective need. Religion, therefore, must subordinate its claims about the world to whatever science decrees. Scientism assumes that science is the controlling reality about life, so anything that can be validated scientifically ought to be done. Other things are subjective fantasy, like love, beauty, good, evil, conscious, and ethics. Science, which originally simply meant the study of the natural world, has in this view become conflicted with scientific naturalism, materialism, and a philosophy that the natural world is all that exists. Humans are reduced to objects that can be inspected, experimented on, and ultimately controlled. In 1922, G.K. Chesterton warned that scientism had become a creed taking over our institutions, a system of thought which began with evolution and has ended in eugenics. But I believe that it began much earlier with the heliocentric universe, our solar system, Big Bang cosmology, giving us the perfect storyline to introduce biological evolution at a later date. As we start our journey looking into scientism deeper, which millions and millions of people in the world recognize as unquestionable scientific fact, we need to start
Scientism and Evolution.
Scientism has its roots in the Big Bang cosmology and evolutionary thought. If humans have evolved by a material, purposeless process, then there is no basis for believing in a God who created us and revealed moral truths. Start with the evolutionary theory and its fabricated millions and billions of years of primordial history. Stop and consider if the entire scientific and academic world has monolithically embraced or endorsed something as unquestionable scientific fact, when in reality, it's been a massive deception on a grand scale.
And so when it comes to things like